At my son's dinner, a seat was carefully set for my late husband, and when I finally learned why that empty chair was waiting for him, my hands shook, my heart raced, and I realized nothing about that night was as simple as it seemed. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video, because when you stop doing this, YouTube understands that you don't like this content and stops recommending good stories like this. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. I never imagined that my quiet life would be broken so abruptly. Everything felt normal that morning, and I was sure it would be just another ordinary day, until Michael and Vanessa called me into the living room with serious faces. When they mentioned a box that Robert had left for me, I felt something inside me freeze. It was as if the floor shifted under my feet. I had loved him for 41 years, and during all those years, I believed we shared everything that mattered. Hearing that there was something hidden, something he had kept only for me to find after his death, made my stomach tighten. When they brought the box to the table, I recognized Robert's handwriting on the small label, and that alone made my hands shake. I sat down, staring at the box, trying to understand why he would leave something like that behind. For a moment, I even thought there might be some kind of mistake. But deep down, I knew it was real. The weight of the situation settled on my chest as I touched the lid, already sensing that whatever was inside would change the way I saw the life we had lived together. When Michael handed me the small hidden key, he explained that Robert had instructed them to give it to me only when they felt I was strong enough. Hearing that made me feel even worse, as if Robert had predicted the shock I was going to experience. I kept turning the key in my fingers, afraid of what I would find, but also knowing I couldn't walk away from it. Vanessa tried to comfort me by placing a hand on my shoulder, but I barely felt it. I was too focused on the box. I took a deep breath, trying to stop my hands from shaking, but the tremor wouldn't go away. Memories of Robert filled my mind, all the moments when I trusted his word without question. I wondered if I had missed signs, small hints that something was hidden, but nothing came to mind. Everything seemed normal, stable, honest. That only made the situation even harder to accept. My heart was beating too fast, and I felt torn between wanting to open the box immediately and wanting to run from it. Still, I knew I had to face it. With the key finally in the lock, I turned it slowly, as if giving myself extra seconds to prepare. The soft click sounded louder than it should, and I knew there was no turning back. I lifted the lid carefully, almost afraid of touching the contents inside. The first thing I noticed was a stack of documents neatly organized, as if Robert had spent time deciding the exact order they should be found in. There were also old photos. Some I recognized and some I didn't. Seeing unfamiliar faces next to Robert made me feel confused, and I realized those photos were part of the secrets he had mentioned. I moved them aside and found an envelope with my name on it, written in the way only he wrote it. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to open it. My throat felt tight, and my eyes were already burning with tears that hadn't fallen yet. I held the envelope carefully, knowing it carried answers, but also knowing those answers might hurt. I wondered why he hadn't told me any of this when he was still alive. The feeling of betrayal, mixed with sadness and longing, made everything heavier. I finally opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The first line already hit me hard. He asked for forgiveness, saying he regretted not having the courage to share certain things with me while he was alive. Reading his words felt strange, like hearing his voice, but knowing he would never speak to me again. I followed each sentence slowly, trying to absorb everything, even when the words made my stomach twist. He explained that he had made mistakes in the past, mistakes he had tried to hide, because he didn't want to lose me. He said he loved me deeply, and that hiding those secrets had been a choice he struggled with for years. That line alone made me stop reading for a moment. I rested the letter on my lap and tried to breathe. I felt angry, sad, confused, and yet part of me still wanted to protect the memory of the man I had loved for so long. After a moment, I kept reading, knowing I needed to reach the end even if it hurt. The deeper I went into the letter, the more I felt the weight of everything he wrote. The documents and photos weren't random. They were proof of the things he had hidden. He explained that he had organized everything so I could understand the full truth without having to rely on anyone else's interpretation. He said he trusted me more than anyone, and that was why he chose to reveal everything only to me. Those words made my eyes fill with tears because they showed both love and fear intertwined. I kept reading, even as the pain grew sharper. I wanted to throw the letter away, but at the same time I needed to know everything. The details he shared made me realize how complicated his past had been before we met, and how much he had tried to bury. I felt as if our entire life had been shaken at its roots, even though part of me knew our shared moments had still been real. Still, the impact of learning all this now, instead of years ago, made me feel both cheated and tired. By the time I reached the last part of the letter, my hands were trembling again. Robert wrote that he hoped I would find strength in the life we had built together, and that I would not let these secrets erase the love we shared. He apologized again, saying he wished he could hold my hands while I read everything, but since he couldn't, he hoped his words would guide me. I placed the letter on the table and stared at the contents of the box, feeling overwhelmed. The truth was right there, waiting for me to examine every detail, to understand every photo and document he had left behind. I knew nothing would be simple after that moment. My heart felt heavy, yet I also felt a strange determination rising in me. I realized that, despite the shock, I had to face everything he had left. As I looked at the open box filled with the life he had hidden, I understood that this unexpected revelation was only the beginning of a difficult journey I had never imagined I would have to walk. The letter was still in my hands, and it felt so heavy that I could barely keep my fingers steady around it. I kept reading the same lines over and over because they didn't seem real to me. Robert asked me to burn everything after reading, every document, every picture, even the letter itself. He wrote that I should not trust anyone, that my life might depend on keeping what I learned hidden. Those words made my stomach turn. I had never imagined hearing something like that from the man I lived with for so many years. I looked up for a moment, and I saw Michael and Vanessa standing there, watching me closely. They didn't say anything, but their eyes showed they were worried about how I was taking all this. I tried to breathe and make sense of the situation. Robert's handwriting was so familiar, yet the things he wrote made him feel like a stranger. He talked about his past in a way that suggested it wasn't only far away, but also dangerous, something he had spent his whole life trying to escape. I felt lost, confused, and scared of what else I would discover. I lowered the letter for a moment and stared at the box on the table, trying to understand who my husband really had been before arriving in Millbrook. His words hinted at a life he had never shared with me. A life filled with secrets and risks that I had never imagined. I read again the part where he mentioned a family I had never heard of, people tied to him in some way that he never explained. There were references to money that had never been mentioned in our home, amounts that didn't match anything in our lives. My hands shook when I remembered the times I had asked him about small things that didn't make sense, and he had always found a simple answer that satisfied me. Now I wondered if those answers had been lies meant to keep me safe, or simply to keep me away from the truth. I looked at Michael and Vanessa again, unsure if I should tell them everything Robert had written, but his warning echoed in my mind. Trust no one. That thought alone made my chest tighten. I turned my attention back to the documents inside the box. Some pages had official stamps, but the names written on them were not the ones I knew. Robert had talked about an identity that didn't completely belong to him. Seeing proof of that in front of me made my heart beat faster. I felt like I was looking at parts of a puzzle that didn't fit with the man I had lived with for decades. I tried to piece things together, but every detail only made me more confused. The papers mentioned places we had never visited and dates that didn't match the stories he used to tell. I thought about all the years we spent together, all the routines, small habits, and moments we shared, and suddenly everything seemed uncertain. Had he been pretending the whole time, or had he been trying to leave that old life behind and build something real with me? I didn't know. I only knew that the truth was bigger than anything I had expected, and I was now standing right in the middle of it without any idea of what to do next. That was when my eyes moved to the photograph on the table. I picked it up slowly and studied it carefully. The man in the picture was Robert, but at the same time he wasn't. He looked younger, harder, with a different expression, as if he carried a weight that shaped the way he stood and looked at the camera. His face was familiar, the same eyes, the same smile I loved, but everything else felt distant. It was like seeing a version of him that I had never been allowed to meet. I felt a strange mix of recognition and discomfort. I kept staring at the picture, trying to match the man in it with the husband I knew. I remembered birthdays, holidays, quiet evenings at home, moments when he laughed or held my hand. None of those memories matched the person in the photograph. It made me feel as if two different lives had collided right there on my table. The longer I looked, the more I felt something inside me sinking. It was like discovering that the life we built had been placed on top of something hidden, something that was now coming to the surface, whether I wanted it or not. I placed the photo beside the documents and folded the letter again, even though my hands were trembling. I knew I couldn't ignore what I had just read. Robert said my life might depend on destroying everything, but how could I burn it all without understanding what any of it meant? I felt stuck between fear and curiosity. If his past had been dangerous enough to threaten me now, then I needed to know exactly why. I needed to understand what these papers represented and who the people in the photo were. But I also felt the fear growing stronger with every new thought. What if reading more only made things worse? What if someone really was looking for him all this time? I tried to steady my breathing and keep my mind clear. Michael stepped closer, as if he wanted to ask something, but he stopped when I shifted my gaze toward him. Vanessa took a small step back, giving me space. They were waiting for me to say something, but I had no words. Everything inside me was a mess. Despite the fear, I understood I couldn't run from this. Robert had left these things for a reason. He wanted me to know the truth, even if the truth was painful and confusing. I knew I would have to go through each page, each picture, and each line he had written, no matter how hard it would be. His request that I burn everything after reading stayed in my mind like a warning I couldn't ignore. I felt as if I had been pushed into a world I never asked to enter, a world built on shadows and old secrets. But I also knew that pretending nothing happened wouldn't help me. I looked at the box again and realized that this was only the beginning. I needed to uncover the story behind the man in the photograph, behind the documents, and behind every word Robert had written. Even if it meant stepping into a past I had never known existed, I had no choice. I had to understand that hidden truth, even if it meant facing things I didn't want to see. That night, the truth started closing in on me in a way I had never imagined possible. Everything around me felt tense and unsafe, and I knew I couldn't stay where I was for even one more minute. I grabbed the keys to Ben's truck because it was the only vehicle available, and I didn't have time to think of anything else. My hands shook as I climbed inside, and I could barely breathe while trying to start the engine. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced someone was already coming after me. Once the truck started, I pushed my foot down and drove out of the driveway faster than I ever had in my life. I didn't even bother turning on the headlights. I knew that anyone following me could spot me easily if I made myself visible, so I chose to drive in almost complete darkness. Every bump in the road made me feel like the truck would slide off course, but I kept going. I didn't know where I was heading. I only knew I had to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever danger was now tied to Robert's secrets. As I sped down the empty road, the silence around me felt heavy and strange. My eyes strained to see what was ahead, relying on the faint light from the moon to guide me enough to avoid driving into a ditch. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, even though I couldn't see much. My heart was pounding so hard that I could feel it in my throat. I kept thinking about the things I had found in the box, the warnings in Robert's letter, and how everything had shifted so suddenly. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a gunshot behind me. The sound was sharp and unmistakable. I didn't need to look back to know someone was aiming at me. Panic took over, and I pressed my foot harder on the accelerator, forcing the truck to move faster than I thought it could. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that they hurt. I didn't know if whoever fired the shot was close or far, but the fear pushed me forward. All I could think about was staying alive long enough to understand what was happening. I kept driving through curves and straight stretches, trying to keep the truck steady even though my mind was racing. I didn't dare slow down. The darkness made everything feel unreal, but the fear kept me alert. At one point, I reached for my phone without even thinking, and as soon as I touched it, it started ringing. I felt a cold sensation in my chest. It was too strange for the timing to be a coincidence. I hesitated, but I answered because I knew that ignoring it wouldn't help me. As soon as I said hello, a woman's voice spoke my name, but not the name I had been using for years. She called me by the name I had abandoned decades ago, a name I thought no one remembered. Hearing it felt like being pulled back into a part of my life I had completely locked away. I froze, unable to speak at first because I couldn't understand how she knew who I really was. Her tone was calm, but there was something sharp underneath it, something that made it clear she wasn't calling to help me. When I finally gathered enough breath to respond, she cut me off and started talking about stolen money. She said she knew everything about me, about the life I had tried to build, and about what Robert had hidden. I felt sick as she spoke. Her words were direct and confident, as if she had rehearsed them many times. She told me not to pretend I didn't understand, and even though I wanted to deny everything, I knew she wouldn't believe me. Then, she demanded cooperation. She didn't explain what she wanted yet, but the threat was clear in her voice. She said things would become much worse for me if I didn't listen. I felt my throat tighten. I didn't know who she was or how much she knew, but her confidence terrified me. She sounded like someone who had done this before, someone who was used to getting exactly what she wanted. I realized she had information I didn't have, and that she wasn't guessing. She knew exactly who I was, and how vulnerable this moment had made me. I felt trapped, as if every choice would lead me into danger. As she kept talking, I realized something even more frightening. Going to the police could make things worse. If this woman knew my old identity, if she knew about the money and the secrets Robert had tried to hide, then the police might not protect me. They might even think I was involved. I thought about driving straight to the station, but every time I pictured it, I saw things going wrong. I remembered Robert's warning in the letter, telling me not to trust anyone. Those words sounded dramatic hours before, but now they seemed painfully real. The woman on the phone didn't sound like someone bluffing. She sounded like someone who had nothing to lose. When the call ended, I felt even more alone. I didn't know what she would do next, or when she would contact me again. I couldn't go home, I couldn't go to friends, and the police were no longer an option. I needed a place where I could think clearly for a moment, away from eyes and ears that might be watching. After driving without any real direction for several minutes, I forced myself to calm down enough to decide where to go. I needed somewhere familiar, but quiet, somewhere where people rarely stayed at night. Then I remembered the city library. It wasn't far from the road I was on, and it was one of the few places I had always gone to when I needed space to think. I turned the truck toward town, keeping the headlights off until I reached the outskirts. My hands were still shaking, but I managed to guide the truck to the parking lot behind the building. It was dark and empty, which made me feel both nervous and relieved. I stepped out of the truck and looked around carefully before walking to the side door. I knew the library well enough to move through it without thinking. Once inside, the quiet felt strange, but comforting. I sat down between two tall shelves, trying to catch my breath. It was the only place where I felt I could think in silence. I had no idea what I would do next, but at least there, away from the road and the darkness behind me, I could try to understand the danger that Robert had left behind. Inside the empty library, the silence felt strong enough to make me tense. Every small sound I made seemed louder than normal, even the click of my shoes on the floor. I walked slowly between the shelves until I reached the computer stations. I sat down in front of one and stared at the screen for a long moment, trying to calm myself. My hands were still shaking from everything that had happened earlier, but I knew I had to push through. I took a deep breath and placed my fingers on the keyboard. For a few seconds I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to see what the truth looked like when written out in public records. But the need to understand was stronger than the fear. Finally, I typed his real name, James Whitmore III. Seeing those words on the screen felt strange and painful. It was like watching a door open into a room I never knew existed. The loading page felt like it took forever, and every second made me more anxious. I knew that whatever I found would change how I saw him forever, but there was no turning back anymore. When the results finally appeared, I leaned closer to the screen. I couldn't believe how many links came up. There were articles, reports, and archived newspapers mentioning the name I had typed. It felt unreal to see his picture next to headlines that didn't match the man I had lived with for years. I clicked on the first article, and slowly, the details began to form a picture I had never imagined. He had belonged to an influential family, one connected to old money, politics, and important business circles. The language in the articles was formal and distant, but the meaning was clear. He had grown up in a world full of expectations, rules, and people who paid attention to everything he did. Looking at photographs of large houses, formal events, and official gatherings made me feel as if I had stepped into someone else's life. None of it matched the quiet, private life we built together. It was impossible to imagine him walking through those large rooms or standing among those powerful people, but the evidence was right in front of me. I kept scrolling through links, opening everything I could find. Each article added more information, and the more I read, the more confused I felt. His family name showed up in different contexts: political campaigns, company mergers, social events, charity debates. The Whitmore family seemed to be everywhere in the old records, and he had been a part of it whether he liked it or not. But what shocked me the most was finding out that his disappearance had been national news in 1982. There were headlines saying he had vanished without explanation. Some articles suggested he had been kidnapped. Others hinted at mental health issues, and a few even suggested he had run away for personal reasons. Seeing the speculation made my stomach twist. The world had searched for him, but he had chosen to disappear completely. I stared at his old photograph, the one used in the articles. It showed him younger, wearing a formal suit, looking confident in a way I had never seen in our everyday life. I tried to connect that version of him to the man I loved, and it felt nearly impossible. I clicked through old newspaper scans, watching the story unfold as if I were reading about a stranger. Some articles mentioned the pressure he faced growing up, the expectations tied to his name, and the responsibilities he would have inherited. There were notes about arguments within the family, comments from unnamed sources, and interviews with people who claimed to know him. One brief line caught my eye, someone saying he had talked about wanting to leave everything behind. That was the first moment when something clicked for me. For the first time, I saw a small trace of the man I had known. Someone who wanted peace, someone who didn't want to be controlled by anyone. I wondered if he had spent years planning his disappearance, or if it had been a sudden decision. I wished I could ask him all these questions, but now I could only try to piece things together with what I had. Every detail I found made me feel like I was rebuilding a puzzle with missing pieces, and yet I couldn't stop digging deeper. As I continued searching, I thought back to the life we had shared. He had always been calm, reserved, and careful about what he talked about. At the time, I assumed it was just part of his personality, but now everything took on a new tone. I understood why he never mentioned his family or childhood, why he avoided talking about certain topics, and why he reacted strongly to anything related to money or politics. The articles painted a picture of a man who had walked away from a world that wouldn't let him live freely. If he had stayed, he would have been trapped in obligations he didn't want. I imagined how hard it must have been for him to create a new identity, cut ties with everyone, and start over in a small town like Millbrook. Thinking about the courage and fear behind that decision made my eyes sting. He hadn't just left behind wealth or status, he had left behind an entire life. And somehow, all those decisions were now affecting me, decades later, even though I had never known any of it. The more I read, the more I understood that Robert hadn't simply stepped away from his past. He had run from something much bigger than I had ever guessed. It became clear that he hadn't just been avoiding a difficult family or suffocating expectations. There were hints in the articles about legal problems, financial issues involving his family, and decisions that might have put him in danger. I didn't know how much of it involved him directly, but I could see that whatever had pushed him to disappear must have been serious. Sitting there in the dim light of the library, with empty rows of shelves around me, I felt a deep weight settle in my chest. His past had been chasing him for decades, and now it had finally reached me. I realized that everything I was facing, the warnings, the threats, the fear, was the result of something he had tried so hard to leave behind. And now I had no choice but to face the consequences of the history that had finally come knocking at my door. The weight of all the revelations stayed with me during the months that followed. It wasn't something I could ignore or push aside, no matter how much I wished for a moment of peace. Every morning, I woke up thinking about the secrets Robert had carried for so long. And every night, I went to bed wondering how he had managed to live with so much hidden inside him. Even simple tasks around the house felt different, because everything reminded me of the man I thought I knew completely. During those months, I found myself replaying old conversations, small gestures, and quiet moments we had shared. Each memory felt heavier, because now I understood how much he had been hiding behind them. Sometimes I felt angry, other times sad, and often I felt lost, but the questions never stopped. I wondered if he ever planned to tell me the truth, or if he hoped I would never discover it. I wondered how much fear he carried every day. Those months were filled with confusion and exhaustion, but also a strange sense of determination. I knew I had to keep moving forward, even with the pain. I knew I had to understand him better, even if it hurt. Talking with Torres helped me more than I expected. He had known parts of Robert's real story, enough to help me see things from a different angle. He explained that Robert had always chosen the truth, even when that truth placed him at risk. Hearing that surprised me, because holding secrets didn't feel like choosing truth. But the way Torres described it made sense. Robert had refused to live under lies that others tried to force on him. He rejected a life built on corruption or expectations that went against what he believed. According to Torres, those choices were exactly what put him in danger. Still, he had made them because protecting the people he loved mattered to him more than his name, his status, or his safety. Listening to Torres talk about him that way made me feel a mix of pride and sadness. Pride because Robert had been stronger than I knew, and sadness because that strength had cost him everything. I started to understand that the secrets he kept weren't meant to push me away. They were meant to keep me safe, even if it meant carrying the burden alone. As Torres continued sharing what he knew, I began to see Robert from a different perspective. He wasn't a man who ran away because he was weak. He ran because he refused to be part of something that went against everything he believed. Torres explained that Robert had given up his entire life, his name, his family, his inheritance, because staying would have meant accepting a world he didn't agree with. That decision had isolated him, but it also freed him to build a life he felt was honest. Hearing this made my chest tighten because I finally understood why he had been so careful, so guarded, and sometimes so distant. He wasn't afraid of being discovered for his sake. He was afraid that I would be hurt by the consequences of his past. Torres said that Robert spoke about me many times, always with respect, gratitude, and fear of losing me if the truth ever reached me. That realization broke something inside me, not out of anger, but because I finally understood the depth of his love. For years, he had lived with the fear that the truth might destroy the life we built together. At the same time, Torres helped me see that the life Robert and I shared had been real, even with the secrets surrounding it. Every moment, every choice we made together, every quiet day we spent at home, it had all been genuine, even if incomplete. Torres said that Robert never faked his feelings or his commitment. The lies were only about the past, not about the present. Hearing that eased something inside me. It didn't remove the pain entirely, but it gave me a sense of understanding. I realized that Robert had wanted to protect me from a world I didn't even know existed. He had feared only one thing, Torres said, that I would suffer if the truth ever came out. And he had been right, because the pain was real. It reached deep into me and made me question everything for a while. But after months of thinking, crying, and trying to make sense of it all, I also reached a point where pain and understanding lived side by side. I could see his choices more clearly now, and even though they still hurt, they also made sense. The pain didn't disappear, but it became something I could carry without breaking. And then, one afternoon, Michael came to talk to me. He said he wanted to return to the farm. His voice was steady and his expression serious, but there was a hint of hope in his eyes. Hearing him say those words stirred something deep inside me. The farm had always been more than a place. It was the center of our family, the place where our lives were rooted. For months, I hadn't allowed myself to think about rebuilding anything. I had been too overwhelmed, too tired, too afraid to imagine the future. But when Michael talked about going back, it felt like a small door opening. I realized that despite everything that had happened, despite all the secrets and all the fear, there were still pieces of my life that could grow again. His decision made me feel a spark of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. I didn't know what the future would look like, but for the first time, I could picture something other than chaos and pain. The idea of rebuilding something alongside my family brought a new sense of meaning to everything I was facing. It didn't erase the past, and it didn't make the danger disappear, but it reminded me that life didn't end with the truth. I could still create something new. Thinking about returning to the farm, walking through familiar rooms, touching the walls that held so many memories, made me feel steadier. I understood that healing wouldn't come quickly or easily, but there was a path, and I wasn't alone on it. Robert's choices had shaped my life in ways I never expected, and they had hurt me deeply, but they had also given me a family to hold on to. As I sat there listening to Michael talk about his plans, I realized that hope wasn't gone after all. It had just been quiet, waiting for the moment I was finally ready to see it. And in that moment, I knew that rebuilding with them was the first step toward finding meaning again, no matter how difficult the journey ahead would be. With time, I slowly found peace in the daily work of the harvest and in spending every day with my family. At first, it felt strange to settle into a routine again after everything that had happened. My mind still wandered to the past more often than I wanted, and some moments hurt more than others. But working with my hands, waking up early, checking the fields, and watching the plants grow gave me a kind of calm I hadn't felt in months. I began to understand why Robert had loved this place so much. The farm didn't ask questions. It didn't remind me of secrets or threats. It simply required effort, attention, and patience. Little by little, the weight I carried started to feel lighter. I could breathe again. I found myself looking forward to simple things like breakfast with Michael or the sound of Emma laughing somewhere outside. Every day, I noticed that life kept moving, slowly but steadily, whether I was ready or not, and being surrounded by family made it easier. The pain didn't disappear, but life didn't stop because of it. The more time passed, the more I realized I could still build something meaningful, even after everything. Seeing Emma run across the fields reminded me that hope had never fully disappeared, even when I felt lost. She moved with so much energy, as if the world had no heaviness in it at all. Sometimes she would stop to show me something she had found, an odd-shaped rock, a flower she liked, or a bug she wanted to keep far away from her bedroom. Her excitement made me smile in a way that felt genuine. Vanessa, meanwhile, spent her afternoons at the kitchen table preparing lessons for her students. She filled notebooks with ideas, drawings, and lists, and every so often she would look up to ask my opinion about a storybook or an activity. Watching them made me realize that life didn't need to be perfect to be beautiful. It could be messy, tiring, and unpredictable, but still worth living. Standing in the doorway one afternoon, I looked at both of them and understood that the future wasn't something to be feared anymore. It was something to be shaped, slowly, with the people who stayed. One evening, while the sky was turning darker and the fields were quiet, Emma came to me with a question I didn't expect. She sat beside me and asked if I was happy. The way she asked it was so simple, but it went straight to my heart. For a moment, I didn't know how to answer. I thought about everything I had lived through, the fear, the discoveries, the secrets, the pain, and the uncertainty that had almost taken over my life. But I also thought about the mornings on the farm, the laughter at the table, the quiet moments with my family, and the feeling of starting over. I realized that happiness didn't look like it used to, but it was still there, in a different, quieter way. I looked at Emma and told her the truth. Yes, I was happy, maybe not every second of every day, but enough to feel grateful. Her smile in response made the moment even stronger. It reminded me that surviving wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new chapter I hadn't imagined I would have. As I thought more about everything that had happened, I understood something important. Despite the pain and the hard truths I had been forced to face, I had survived. I had walked through confusion, fear, and grief, and yet I was still standing. I had always believed that secrets had the power to destroy a person, but now I saw things differently. Secrets can cause pain, yes, but they don't define who we are. What defines us are the choices we make afterward. I chose to keep going. I chose to rebuild. I chose to protect my family and take care of the farm. These choices were mine, not shaped by anyone else's past. When I looked around the house at night or stepped outside to breathe the cool air, I felt a quiet strength growing inside me. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady, something built little by little, the same way crops grow inch by inch. And each day that passed proved to me that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. The farm would continue, no matter what had happened before. It had survived storms, droughts, and losses, and now it was surviving the truth as well. In its own way, the farm carried Robert's legacy, not because of who he once was in another life, but because of the life he chose to build here. Every fence he fixed, every seed he planted, every decision he made had shaped this place. And even though he was gone, the results of his work were still here, surrounding me every day. That thought gave me comfort. I knew that people often talked about legacies as something big and dramatic, But his legacy wasn't loud. It was quiet and steady, just like him. And now it was my responsibility to carry it forward, not out of obligation, but out of love. I understood that I didn't need to erase the past to honor him. I only needed to keep going with the same dedication he once had. That night, when the house was quiet and everyone else was asleep, I sat alone and let myself think about everything one last time. I closed my eyes and felt grateful, not only for the truths that finally came to light, but also for the lies that had protected me when I couldn't have handled the danger. I didn't hate Robert for the choices he made. I saw now that he had done the best he could in a complicated and frightening situation. The truth had hurt me, but it had also set me free from confusion and doubt. It allowed me to see my life clearly again, without shadows. I whispered a silent thank you for the life we shared, for the love that had survived everything, and for the strength I had discovered in myself. For the first time in a long while, I felt complete. The past had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me. And with that thought, I finally felt ready to live fully again, free to move forward with honesty, hope, and peace. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.